Well, it's time now for our weekly Newsmakers segment where we discuss the news issues of the week. And joining me is Tim Soutphommasane, politics academic with Monash University, philosopher and current fellow at the St James Ethics Centre, and Kate Carnell, who's the Chief Executive of the Food and Grocery Council and former ACT Chief Minister. Welcome to you for both, and thanks very much for coming in this morning. Let's start off with asylum seekers, and SBS aired its kind of reality program Go Back this week over 3 nights, pitting 6 Australians with different viewpoints and taking them on a journey many boat people are forced to take. Let's first take a quick look.
Water coming in everywhere down here. What? I think boats are meant to take on water, rather. Not like this. I can't even see where this water's coming from at the moment. Righto. What's happened there? Let's toll that road. Mate, we're going under. Joking. Mate, have to get water down here.
Where did you say those life jackets were? It's almost like we're not even making a difference.
Well, that's an excerpt from the SBS program Go Back. If I can start with you, Kate Carnell, did you get a chance to look at it, and what were your impressions?
Look, I have to say I wasn't all that impressed with the whole show. I think what was really useful is we did get an opportunity to have a look at what life was like in refugee camps in a number of parts of the world, and I think we all feel incredible sympathy for the people who are in that space. That said, I don't think that feeling that those people are in a really rotten position in any way changes the view that Australia really has to have some real policies to ensure that people who apply appropriately through the system are given an opportunity to come to Australia. I didn't think it showed that hopping on a boat was any more appropriate than staying in a queue. It made you understand why people want to hop on a boat and try to come to Australia, but it doesn't make the people who are waiting in line any less, any less able to really be at the front of the queue.
Tim Soutphommasane, did the program for you bring up any ethical issues in terms of how Australians think about asylum seekers?
I certainly did, and I guess I had a different response than Kate to the program. And for me, I really felt that the program was an Australian equivalent to the American experiment that Jane Elliott ran on racism, Blue Eyed, and really demonstrated the kind of moral transformations that can take place when you're able to put yourself into the shoes of others and see the world through other people's eyes. And we saw that segment of the participants in that boat. I remember at the end of that segment, you had one of the participants, Darren Hassan, saying, I object to the enforced empathy that this exercise has inflicted on me. And I think that was very telling in that you had some participants in that program really resisting, I think, the impulse to empathise with asylum seekers. And that for me was the real ethical dimension to this program. It really got to empathy in its most fundamental sense, which is to see the world and experiences through the eyes of others. But
as Kate said, does empathy make one actually think we need to completely change our policies and the way we deal with asylum seekers?
Well, certainly I think calls upon us to see asylum seekers in less abstract terms and in more human terms. I think it's easy to regard asylum seekers as queue jumpers or as criminals, as some of the participants in that program like to think of them as, but if you acknowledge the complexities of the human experiences in it, then I think it perhaps demands a less polarised debate, a more mature debate, and one that is willing to put things into perspective.
But those people that we saw on that program in refugee camps in Africa and other places who are waiting in line, it doesn't give them any less right to be looked at appropriately for migration into Australia. I mean, the problem really is where the boat people are, and I know I hate to use the word queue jumping, but for all of that queue jumping when you've got all of those people living in incredibly bad situations in refugee camps around the world that have got their hands up to come to Australia. And I believe we should have more migrants more refugees into Australia, but I think that we have to look at it that we do have a process in place and we need to follow it.
But if I can just briefly interject here, I was wondering, Kate, did it make you think twice about Australia sending 800 people to Malaysia, for example?
Well, see, I don't support that at all. I think it's dreadful. I don't think we can abrogate our responsibility to those people that end up, on Australian shores in boats. For all of that, though, the people who are sitting there in those refugee camps that we saw on that program for 3, 4, 5, even longer years, we've really got to look at bringing more of those to Australia and discouraging boat people. That's, the bottom line here.
Yeah, I guess for me it's really about acknowledging the complexity of the issue here. And while you can invoke queue jumping in queues, if we are talking about queues, it's a very long queue, and if you're in those refugee camps, you can be there for 15, 20 years.
But a lot of those people are never going to be able to pay. A lot of those people in refugee camps are never going to be able to put their hand in their back pocket and pay for people to bring them to Australia, in boats. Let's be fair.
Well, most people can't pay for it anyway.
So there's only a very
few they
actually
go to get the money, and sometimes their families are in debt for the rest of their lives.
Yeah.
But we might leave that issue for the moment. It's just over a year since Julia Gillard took the helm of the Labor Party in the country. I wonder, Tim Soutphommasane, how do you rate the government's performance a year after the end of Kevin Rudd, although he's still, of course, with us?
Indeed he is. I think it's been a difficult year, a challenging year for Labor. But what's really surprised me with the last really fortnight of commentary about this anniversary is just how much of the commentary has I think, validated the sideshow thesis that the likes of Lindsay Tanner have put forward. In terms of the anniversary, lots of attention on personalities, lots of attention on polls, and I think in many cases the anniversary has been a non-story in many respects. I don't think Kevin Rudd is going to be a viable shot at being Prime Minister again. He doesn't have the support of the Labor caucus. Labor federally, I don't think, wants to replicate the problems of New South Wales Labor and having a revolving door of leadership. But in terms of polls, I think Gillard's going to be hoping for a tortoise and the hare sort of story here. There's still a long time yet before the next poll, and Labor would hope that it can build on achievements such as the NBN deal that it sealed this week.
Kate Carnell, you've been a leader before. Why do you think it is that people just don't seem to be warming enough to Julia Gillard?
Look, there's been a whole range of reasons for that, not the least of which being, Kevin is still very much in the limelight. I think one thing that this week showed, though, is that there's no support at all for Kevin to, except maybe from some Australians looking at the polls, but in Parliament, no support for Kevin to come back, and no other successor to Julia really, stepping up to the line. Julia will be leader of the Labor Party through to the next election, there's no doubt about that. But it really is interesting that Australians now seem to have turned off. They really seem to have turned off to the Gillard government, looking at the polls, that is, and that's a real problem for Julia.
Okay, well, Kate Carnell, you were making some headlines this week with leading health experts criticising the Food and Grocery Council as being a key obstacle to improving health. Let's hear from Bruce Neal of the George Institute for Global Health at Sydney University.
We have foods that are causing an enormous burden of premature death and disability because of excess salt, excess saturated fat, huge numbers of calories and small portion sizes. And what we're not seeing is the Food and Grocery Council taking the leadership to try and make this better. Instead, what we're seeing is the Food and Grocery Council sort of employing delaying tactics, watering down the key strategies here.
That's Bruce Neal. Well, Kate, your council's been accused of putting barriers into place to prevent effective policies in place for obesity prevention. How do you respond to that?
Well, it's just simply wrong. As I said on the program, it was the Food and Grocery Council that went to the federal government a couple of years ago and said, look, we need to have a round table here to start the process of reducing salt and saturated fats in products. That's called the Food and Health Dialogue, which was set up It's sort of a round-table approach that's addressing salt and saturated fats in a range of foods. Already there's targets been set and started to be implemented on bread, cereals. We're looking at simmer sauces. There is processed meat to reduce the saturated fats. All that's actually happening. What Bruce Neal wants is he wants legislated limits done yesterday. Now, the problem with that is that, well, to start with, it's incredibly costly for industry, but that's not the reason we oppose it. People want